Hello, thank you for watching. My name's Dom and I'm the Associate Vicar of Hazelmere Church, and this is a short devotional study on Psalm 22. It's a psalm which insists on holding together two seemingly contradictory sets of facts. On the one hand, a very real sense of being abandoned by God, and on the other, God at work for good right in the midst of things. It's a psalm of King David, and we know quite a bit about King David's life. However, we can't find a recorded incident in his life that would seem to fit the facts of this psalm. So that's why some commentators suggest that this is simply a prophecy. It's simply pointing towards what would happen with Jesus on the cross, but it isn't about King David's life. However, what we do know is that King David went through all kinds of trouble and difficulty and had enemies. So actually others would say, well, no, this is about King David's life. When we're anxious, when we're troubled, when there is stress, then we use hyperbole. We use imagery and all kinds of language to try and somehow explain the emotions that we're going through. Most of all, though, this is a psalm of hope. It's a psalm of hope that goes beyond despair. And it gives the answer. It gives the source of the hope. It points to Jesus Christ himself. So let's have a look at the psalm. Now, it's split into two parts. The first part, verse 1 to 21, is a prayer in the dark, a plea for help. And verses 22 to the end is a song of praise in the light, rejoicing in the goodness and the salvation of God. The first part starts by alternating between looking at King David and then looking at God. The sections that focus on King David get longer and more intense and more graphic as it goes on. And the sections that focus on God get deeper as it looks more into who he is. And David refers to enemies in the psalm. His complaint is against these enemies, and he uses metaphors to describe how he thinks the enemies view him and how he views these enemies. Have a look at verses 6 to 8. Here he speaks of himself as a worm. Now imagine for a moment that you're outside, maybe you're digging in the garden, doing a bit of gardening, and you put your spade right through a worm and cut it clean in half. What are you going to do? Well, the answer is not very much at all. You're not going to be that upset, you're not going to shed a tear, you're certainly not going to lose any sleep. At most you might be a little disappointed that it can't aerate the ground, but probably not more worried than that. That is how David was describing himself. Someone small, insignificant, that no one would be worried about at all. But when we look at those few verses, 6 to 8, we see that it gets worse. Because David not only is describing himself as a worm, but saying that he is viewed like this because he's put his trust in God. And his enemies and those around him are scoffing because he's put his trust in God. That's why they view him as a worm. And here's David saying, I'm trusting in you, God, but you seem to have abandoned me. It then gets even worse when he describes himself later on as a dog. Imagine a wild stray dog on dusty roads. No one wants to go near, they'd be worried what it might do. They'll be moving away from it, keep their distance, and they'll be shunning it, maybe kicking at it or throwing stones at it to keep it away. That's how David is saying he feels. And then his enemies. I don't know if you've ever been walking in a field of cows and then you look up and the herd of cows have got together and they're slowly moving towards you and then maybe break into a run. Or worse still, you're crossing a field and you know that there is a bull in that field. You look up and it's charging towards you. What are you going to do? You're going to get out of there as soon as you can. Well, this psalm says David's enemy isn't like a single bull. It's like a whole herd of bulls. Many bulls surround me. Strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. Then it seems to get even worse. Then instead of bulls, he says, no, it's like a pride of lions, and they're ready to rip me apart. David is terrified. So that's the first section. And then the second section, verses 22 to the end, turns a complete corner. It looks very different indeed. Here David is celebrating. He's feasting. There's one verse, verse 26, which says, the poor will eat and be satisfied. Well, that's great. And then later on, verse 29, all the rich of the earth will feast and worship. It's a wonderful banquet for the Lord God, and indeed with him. And it ends by saying that even though this might be for the future, future generations will speak of what the Lord has done. So when we think of some future banquet, which is often how heaven is described, the metaphors that are used there, David is saying, well, actually, God will do good by his people now on earth as well. And we don't just expect that in heaven. So why has the corner changed? Why have we seen this change from verse 21, where David is crying out, rescue me, save me, and then on to 22, when he is saying, all will honour God? Well, this is a powerful song of prophecy. It speaks of Jesus' death on the cross, even 1,000 years before Jesus was even born in Bethlehem. We can see this in verses 17 and the following verses there. Crucifixion was something that hadn't even been invented when this psalm was written. Yet these verses so accurately describe someone dying by crucifixion. When you're crucified, your flesh drains away like water. Your joints, by the pressure that is put on them by being hung up just by nails, start to dislocate. Your mouth goes dry. You tear your hands and feet. And in Jesus' case, miraculously, no bone was broken. Also, we see that in Jesus, he had garments which he was wearing. They were taken off him, but the soldiers didn't want to rip these up and share them out in the way they normally would, but they wanted to keep them whole, so they cast lots for them. And it is exactly these features of Jesus' death that we see in this psalm, even down to not breaking a bone, which was what happened to Jesus, but not unique to everyone who was crucified, and the unique thing of having his clothes shared out by casting lots. So how is this hope? Well, it gives two reasons for hope. First, when the psalmist is saying, God, where are you? The answer is, I've been through it. I know what it's like to suffer. I know what it's like to go through pain and anxiety and fear. And so I can identify with you. And that's the first thing. But it's not the most important part of this, because the most important part is the work that Jesus did on the cross. You see, when we sin, when we turn our backs on God, it demands a consequence. It demands a punishment. And God sent Jesus to die on the cross so that he himself would bear that punishment, so that we can be given access to come to him afresh. That's why Jesus said, I have come to give you life, and life in abundance. So that's Psalm 22. It ends at the last verse with a very similar cry to that which Jesus is recorded to have given on the cross. Jesus cried out, it is finished. And here David says, for he has done it.